Hey, Fortnite creators. Today we're going to dive into a game changing topic that'll take your UEFN projects to the next level: state management. Imagine you're building an epic Fortnite experience with multiple parts. As your project grows, you might find yourself struggling to keep track of important information within your code across the different areas of your project. That's where state management comes in. State management is like having a central command center in your code for your game's data. It helps you organize and share information between different parts of your code, making it easier to create complex and awesome experiences. Before we dive into today's tutorial, I want to show you a real world example of why state management is so crucial. Check out this gameplay footage from my latest UEFN creation, Fireball Arena. Fireball Arena is a fast paced, team based game where teams try to score goals. It's like hockey, lacrosse, soccer, rugby, and Fortnite all had a baby. And as you can see, there's a lot going on. Players passing the ball, goal messages appearing with the player's name, on screen alerts telling you that you have the ball, telling you if the other team has the ball, visual effects highlighting the player with the ball, and a shot charger that shows you how much power you've built up to shoot your shot. And a lot more is going on as well. Behind the scenes, state management is the unsung hero making all of this possible. All of this data is managed through a global state object. This means I can keep my game logic clean and separate from the complex UI code that updates the HUD. It's like having a central brain for the game that all the parts can easily communicate with. This approach didn't just make Fireball Arena possible, it made the development process way smoother. I could focus on creating the gameplay and mechanics without worrying about how different parts of the code would share information. And guess what? The technique I used in Fireball Arena is exactly what I'm going to show you today. By the end of this tutorial, you'll have the tools to create your own complex data-driven games in UEFN, just like this one. So, are you ready to level up your UEFN skills and create games that are not just fun to play, but also well organized under the hood? Well, let's dive in and unlock the power of state management. Okay, let's take a look at our project here. So, first we're going to look just here in the editor so you can see what elements are in the game. Then we're going to take a quick hop into the game so you can see the functions in the game. And then we'll go look at the code to see how the code is accomplishing the state management that you see. Okay, so you can see we have four verse devices here. We have a mutator zone, we have two switches, and we have the campfire. Now, the way this game is going to work, it's not really a game, it's just a technology demo, really. And what's going to happen, oh, and we also have a timer right here. So what's going to happen inside our little demo is this fire is going to start when the player either enters into this mutator zone or if the player ducks. And what that's going to do is it's going to write the player's name or the player's object, the player's agent, to our global state management function. When we click on this light switch over here, it's going to print something on the screen that will tell us if a player has started this fire. And then when we click on the button on the right, it's going to clear the data in the state manager and it'll change the message that appears on the screen. Okay, let's hop into the game real quick so you can see it in action. Okay, we're in the game now, and you can see here we've got our mutator zone. We have our first light switch, or our second switch over here, or I should say button device to be technical. And you can't see the fire yet because it's behind this clock over here. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit this test state first, and you'll see the message print out at the top left of the screen. And it says player who pressed the button is Ghost of Satoshi, and then it says nothing to see here. Okay, now there's two ways to trigger the state update. I can enter this mutator zone, and we can see that, oh, we have started a fire over there. And now if I come over here and push this again, it'll say the player who pushed the button is Ghost of Satoshi. The player who started the fire is Ghost of Satoshi. And it says the player agent that pushed the button is the same as the agent that started the fire. And now I can clear the state over here, push this button, and then after I do that and come back and push this again, you can see player name who pushed the button, Ghost of Satoshi, and then it also says nothing to see here. Okay, and the same thing happens then if I duck, it starts the fire, and I push the button again, and then our other message pops up. And then I guess the last thing to point out is that when you duck, it also pauses the game timer. That's a minor part of the functionality, as you'll see. It's not hugely important, but I wanted to show it to you because it's a real use case that we use in Fireball Arena. Okay, let's hop back into the code and see how this all is set up. Okay, so now we're back in the code, and if we look over at the editor, just to remind you from earlier, we have 4 verse devices, and over here in our Verse Explorer, we see that we have 5 verse files. So we have a verse device for, or a verse file for our button verse device, a campfire verse device, a game clock verse device, a game manager verse device, and then our global state manager. So we're going to go ahead and we're just going to dive into the state manager first. And before we get into the code, I'll point out that all this code will be available on my GitHub and will be linked in the description below. I'm not going to scroll through this slowly so that you have to manually type it all out. I'm not going to send you to a Discord server or somewhere else to try to get it. You can just go copy and paste it right from GitHub. Okay, so let's look at our global state object and see how it's all set up. I've got some documentation in the code over here, which should be helpful when you copy this. So the state module, which you see down here, is public, which means it can be accessed globally in other verse files. So then what we have here are little, what I call state machines. Maybe there's a better term for it, but this is what I'm calling them inside UEFN. And we have one here for the game clock state. We have one here for the last player who entered the mutator, in case you wanted to track something like that. But the one we're going to focus on here is the last player agent who started the fire, because that was really the centerpiece of our demo. Okay, so each state machine has 3 components, a variable, a getter function, and a setter function. And this is a pretty common pattern that you see in other programming languages. So there's nothing particularly crazy about this. Fairly standard type of state management configuration. So let's take these one piece at a time. So if you want to expose a value or a variable globally, it has to be of type weak map. And weak map is going to accept a session type and another type that's going to represent the value that we're going to be storing. And then the getter function, as you might have guessed, would be called from other parts of the code when you want to retrieve the value in the variable. So we would call state.getPlayer who started fire if we want to get the name or the agent of the player who started the fire. And then we would call set player who started fire from other parts of the code when we want to update that value. So those are really the main components. Now let's go look in the code to see what's happening here. Okay, we're going to start with the game manager, And this is going to have our mutator device. And when the player enters the mutator device, it's going to call a function. When a player exits the mutator device, it's going to call another function. So most notably, when the player enters the mutator, that triggers the fire to start. So what we're going to do is state.set the player who started the fire, and we're going to set that value to our agent, right? Because this is a event subscription, and this particular one passes in the agent representing the player that entered the mutator. So we grab this agent value, we pass it into our setter function. Now we have to pass it in as an optional because it's expecting an optional in this function, right? So if we don't make it optional, it's gonna bark at us here. Okay, so it has to be an optional. And if you're wondering why a function that accepts an optional value won't accept the real McCoy, like why does this produce an error? It's a good question. And most other languages that I've experienced, if you have a function that accepts an optional value and you just provide the value, it accepts it without complaint. In verse, if it's expecting an optional, you better give it an optional, otherwise it will not compile. Okay, so here we're setting the player who started the fire. We're also subscribing to a crouched event, which also sets the player who started the fire. So we can update the player who started the fire from two different locations. And technically this could be in another verse file by itself, and it could update the state just the same way. Okay. Now let's look at our button verse file. And now in here, we're bringing in our two buttons, our two switches that we saw in the map. Okay, and again, both buttons have available subscription events to handle instances when the button is interacted with. Okay, so we're subscribing to two of them. One is the button that was on the left, the handle test button interacted. So to test what is in the state and print it out up on the screen, and then another button to reset the global state value. Okay, so our handle test button interacted, it's going to accept an agent. And the first thing that it's going to do before it does anything related to state is just give us the name of the player that pressed the button. Okay, player name who pressed the button is agent. Now we need to get the value from our global state object. So it's coming in as an optional. So we're going to name it maybe player who started fire, PWSF. Once we get this out of our state object, we don't know if it's an actual agent or if it's a value of false. So it could be a value of false. We don't know. So what we're going to do is, if it is an agent, we're going to save it into this player who started fire variable here, and then we're going to print the name of the player who started the fire. And actually, this should be like that. So in this line over here, we're just going to have a quick logical test to see if the agent who pressed the button is the same as the agent who started the fire. And if they are the same, we're going to print it out here. And the reason why I'm doing this here, this is a pretty contrived example, but I do use this technique in Fireball Arena. And I wasn't sure if this was going to work because in other programming languages, well, often even if the objects have the exact same data in them, if you try to compare them with an equality operator, it'll come back as false, because a lot of times these object comparisons will happen by reference rather than by value. So the fact that this works is actually pretty powerful, and it tells us that we can store the agent in a global state object, and then we can pull it out and compare it to agents that are in our local verse files, and know that if they are the same, this will be true. So this is a really cool and powerful capability. Okay, and so the other thing that we do here is handle the reset button event, right? So when we clicked the button to reset the state, this is what was executed. State.setPlayer who started fire, and we set it to false. So we reset it, and then when we clicked on that button again, it said player who pressed the button, and it gave us the agent, and then it printed out nothing to see here because we reset the state value. So this is the fundamentals of how this is set up. There's some other stuff happening here in our game clock, pretty similar. I guess a quick explanation as to why this is here. In UEFN and Verse, the timer device is actually, it's pretty nice, it's pretty powerful, and it exposes a lot of functions. It gives you the ability to enable it, start it, stop it, reset it, get the active time, get the active duration. That's that function there. There's no function that you can call with the timer device that just tells you if it's running or not. So in Fireball Arena, there were some safety mechanisms that I needed to put in place to say, okay, if the game clock is stopped, certain things would never be true, and if they were true, I would set them back to the desired state. So what this is doing is it's starting a loop, and when the loop starts, it gets the current time on the clock, it waits 50 milliseconds, gets the time again, and if time 1 equals time 2, so if these two times are the same, having 50 milliseconds transpired between these two measurements, if they are the same, then we know that the clock is stopped, and we update the game clock state to be not running. If they're not the same, then we know that the game clock is running. So this is just another example of something that you might use to update global state. And that way, if you need to determine elsewhere in the code if the game clock is running, all you do is get these values. You get the game clock state. You don't have to copy and paste this loop 100 times all over your code. So another potential use case. Okay, so let's just take one hop back into the game. Now that you've seen the code, we're going to look at the game one more time, just so you can see all this happening. All right, now we're back in the game, and if you recall, if we go into this mutator zone, it's going to update the state. But first, we're just going to check the state here. Player who pressed button is Ghost of Satoshi. Nothing to see here, so we're not getting any information printed out regarding the player who started the fire. We'll go into our mutator zone. We started the fire. We'll click on this again, and we see all that information pop up at the top left of the screen. Let's reset the state. Check it again. And now nothing to see here. Very, very cool. Let's duck. We'll start the fire again. Test our state. We're getting all that information now that the state has been updated. Let's reset the state and check it again. And there we go. Nothing to see here. Very good. All right, well, I think that's pretty much going to wrap us up for today. I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comment section below. If you have any suggestions regarding how you might have done this differently, please feel free to put that in the comment section below as well, because I love to learn what you all have to share as well. Again, check out Fireball Arena. I think it's pretty fun. Not a lot of people are playing it just yet because it just came out. We're hoping that it gets legs and people start to enjoy it. Anyways, thank you for your time and get out there and code.